Yes, hello, and thank you very much for coming. Jean asked at the beginning what is going to be the biggest threat to freedom coming up, and the best answer to that at the moment is that we don't know. The gravity of the world situation is extraordinary. Manufacturing output has fallen faster since the crisis really got going in 2008 than it fell at the start of the Great Depression. It's falling an awful lot faster. Our country, I think, is horribly vulnerable, horribly vulnerable, simply because of the level of our debt, level of personal debt, which, when I was researching that book, I was astonished to discover is higher than the Americans, who everyone likes to portray as these gross credit card spending people, level of corporate debt, level of government debt. And so the big answer, the simple answer is we don't know. If I was sitting here, or we were all sitting here in 1929, and someone on this platform had stood up and said, right, what's going to happen now is communist Russia, which is already a tyranny, it's going to become unbelievable. The crimes it will commit against the citizens of the Soviet Union are beyond the human imagination. If they were to predict Hitler, if they were to predict the whole of Eastern Europe, even before the Nazis invaded, the whole of Eastern Europe turning into pretty ugly, I mean very, very ugly autocracies. The war in the Far East, the atomic bomb, you would have stood up, well, you wouldn't have believed them, and I doubt anyone could have predicted it. Similarly, if we'd been here in 1969, before the long crisis of the 70s through to the early 80s, long economic crisis, the end of post-war Keynesianism, the end of the social democratic model. And you talked about, you wouldn't even have to talk about Pol Pot and Pinochet, let's talk about what was going to happen to Britain. 3-day weeks, 2 governments brought down by the unions, Margaret Thatcher, mass unemployment, the whole country changed beyond recognition. Again, no one could predict it, and even if they could, no one would believe it. So at the moment, real threats. Well, look at what's already there. There's a bit of a myth that the world since 1989 has been the end of history, so to speak. Liberal democracy has triumphed, and it has swept all before it. It has in some ways. People who talked of the end of history weren't just being naive and foolish. What they meant was a liberal order of democracy, rights, free markets was the only serious order that humanity could attain to. Well, that already has had a massive blow, really, from the success of radical Islam, which is a hugely anti-liberal movement. But beyond that, look at the way autocracy is prospering around the world. The argument that democracy, liberty was advancing wasn't just, it was the best idea. It was a good idea. I would say, giving people human rights is always a pretty good idea. It was the only way you could become rich, a country could become rich and make money was by doing all these things, by having a mixed market, by having sovereign government, by having empowered citizens. Well, in China, that's simply not true. In Russia, that's not true. In Russia, they seem to be moving towards democracy, but under Putin, they've gone right back. So I would expect to see not fascism. Sorry, when people say fascism, they normally mean Nazism. Fascism in 1929 would have meant Mussolini's Italy. Nationalistic, xenophobic and chauvinist, but not necessarily hugely racist countries who use trade as a weapon, who are not open, who are authoritarian, very like Putin's Russia. All over the world now, the basic economic model for countries with oil is not a corporation, which, however disgustingly corporations behave, are rule-bound institutions, not very good rule-bound institutions, but the sovereign wealth fund used by with a lot of corruption, with a lot of secrecy. So I would expect to see a lot more of that. This really is. I got the feeling, going back over the bubble years in this book, that we have lived through an extraordinarily naive time, both nationally and internationally. And if you look at the darker forces in the world, you can see in embryo now that the trouble with what the bloody banks have done is they've taken down the best of the West with them. You know, you can imagine a dictator with people protesting and saying, we want more rights, we want more freedom. Oh, that's the Western model. Look what happens there. Look what happens in those countries. All that happens is the systems run out of control. There's no order. Lots of people have an instinct for order. They would rather have order than freedom in their hearts. That's what's happened in Russia. They associate freedom with the 90s, with oligarchs going out of control, with the GDP collapsing in half. No, they want order. So that's the real legacy to human freedom, the bankers and all those people, including our government, who failed to regulate them, have left it. They sort of, in the eyes of those who are against it, have given them some ammunition. Now, beyond that, and I'm sorry, it just seems such an extraordinary time we're living through, with so many old illusions being ripped up. It is quite important to say that in 1929 or 1969, no one would have known. But the example of, you know, the two, if you like, great depressions, recessions of the 20th century is not a great deal of good comes from them. I think that's the mildest way of putting it.